compound sentences. Now we're going to talk about complex sentences. So complex is not simple, it's difficult. The qualifier that makes a complex sentence complex is that we use dependent clauses in complex sentences. Now those two types of clauses, an independent clause, you can walk up to someone and it has meaning. You can walk up to someone and say, I play piano. And they know what you mean. A dependent clause cannot be on its own. It's dependent on an independent clause. It needs an independent clause. For example, if I walked up to someone and I said, although I am tired, and I walked away, I didn't say anything else. I just said, although I am tired, and I walk away, they might think I'm a crazy person because it doesn't give a complete thought. It doesn't give enough information. We need to connect it to an independent clause, something that can stand alone by itself. It's like an anchor for that dependent clause. Let's look at some examples of those. Winston enjoys marketing. Now that is an independent clause. That can stand alone. A dependent clause would be something like, because he gets to be creative. Now I could not walk up to you on the street and say, because he gets to be creative, and walk away. You would not know what I meant. There would be no meaning there. So I need to connect those two things. And when I do connect an independent clause and a dependent clause, it becomes a complex sentence. So the example here, we can combine in a couple different ways. Usually it does not matter which clause comes first, much like conditional sentences, which are also complex sentences and which we also have more lessons about. So tune in again to one of our classes here. This class is on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock. We will have more lessons on conditional sentences, which I also love to teach. So I could say either first. I can start with this right here, the blue, is the dependent clause, the one that cannot be by itself. I can say, because he gets to be creative, Winston enjoys marketing. Because he gets to be creative, Winston enjoys marketing. And because is showing this reason. But it is an independent clause on the end and a dependent clause in the beginning. We can switch those, however. We can switch them around. And we could begin with the independent clause, such as Sophie gets her work done. And we can add a dependent clause even when she doesn't feel well, even when she does not feel well. I could also do this with each example and simply switch them around. I could start, and let me show you here actually. I'll show you the comparison between the two. Here we have the dependent clause, which I will make not bold, and the independent clause, which I will make bold there. Because he gets to be creative, Winston enjoys marketing. And the only reason that this letter here, I should note, is capitalized is because it is a proper noun. It's a name. I capitalize my name, Joshua. Caesar capitalizes his name. Rosa capitalizes her name. That's what we do with names. They're proper nouns. So this is not because of this comma here. If this were a regular noun, this letter here, the W, would be small. However, I can show you, we can switch these around and there's no problem. We can take this first dependent clause and start with that. We can start with Winston enjoys marketing. We'll use our comma here. There we go. We do not need a comma there, actually. Winston enjoys marketing because he gets to be creative. And I put a period at the end of the sentence. When we begin with the independent clause in sentences like this, we do not need the comma. We just say, Winston enjoys marketing because he gets to be creative. It is only when we begin with the dependent clause, because he gets to be creative, right here, this is the dependent, because he gets to be creative, Winston enjoys marketing. When I begin with that dependent clause, I do need this comma here. So it doesn't matter which order they go in. The only difference is if I begin with the dependent clause, I do use a comma. If I begin with the independent clause, the comma is not necessary. I do not need it. Let's see here. I am going to keep going through this lesson. Now, there are some common subordinating conjunctions that often begin a dependent clause. There are many, and we use some more than others. So we've tried to compile a list here that can help you recognize some of the more common subordinating conjunctions. Although, now, earlier in the chat, someone was asking about although. And I'm trying to see, was that Anita, did you ask about although? Someone asked about although, and I said we'd get to it. Well, we're there. We're getting to although. Although is common, and I could teach a whole lesson on the different meanings of these subordinating conjunctions. But basically, although, as, after, because, they hold different meanings and relationships to the dependent clause and the independent clause. When I use although, let's look at a couple sentences and I'll write them out and then I'll explain what the purpose of using although is. He never washes his hair, although it, well, let me see. He never washes his hair. I'm trying to come up with an example off the spot here. And I'm having a hard time. He never washes his hair, although he should. How about that? We're gonna give a little bit of advice. Although he should. So maybe this is my friend, and he has very dirty hair, and I say, you know, you should really take a shower, I think, Neil. And I use this to add information that is in contrast to the first independent clause. So he never washes his hair. I could say that by itself. I could put a period at the end of that sentence because it is independent, but I want to add information that's related to it. He never washes his hair, although he should. It adds extra information, and the information is usually in opposition to the first clause, the first independent clause there. We can use other words too, such as, after, because, before. Before and after are two of the most common words. We use them to show relationship of time. And an easy way to think about this is a routine in the morning. You could say, I brush my teeth after I wake up. I brush my teeth after I wake up. I brush my teeth is an independent clause. It can be alone. I brush my teeth. It's a good thing. Smiling teeth, right? I cannot say after I wake up by itself. So that is the dependent clause. That is the one that needs the first clause. And it shows order of time, after. It would not make sense to say, I wake up after I brush my teeth, because this means I'm sleeping and I'm brushing my teeth in my sleep. It wouldn't make sense. So when you use words like these, think about the relationship that the word creates and make sure that your clauses are in the correct order, because if I switched those, it would seem a bit strange. Let's see here, Caesar, you had a question here. Is it suitable to use a semicolon to list things? Oh, we talked about that. Sorry. Tara, your question is, can the conjunctions go anywhere in the sentence? That is a great question. The conjunctions have a specific place in the sentence. And I think that you're probably talking about these coordinating conjunctions or subordinating conjunctions that we were talking about here. Usually, they can go in any order, the clauses, and they introduce the dependent clause. We need to put it in that place to introduce the dependent clause. Now, the dependent clause could be first in the sentence. For example, because he gets to be creative, Winston enjoys marketing. Or it can be at the end of a sentence, even when she doesn't feel well. The important thing to remember is these sentences in blue that we're looking at here are dependent. And these subordinating conjunctions introduce the dependent clause. We could not, for instance, say, because Winston enjoys marketing, because he gets to be creative. I mean, that would be using it twice. These words can go in other places in the sentence, but when we're talking about combining dependent and independent clauses, they introduce the dependent clauses. Let me see here. So good question, Tara. That's a great question. That brings us to the end of our lesson here.